Today's numbers, how do they sit with you? What's your interpretation?
Yeah, dead flat. We've actually seen no real GDP growth since January. There was a bump in GDP growth in January that made the first quarter positive, but the second quarter, as you'll recall, was negative, although again, it was a rounding error. The third quarter now, since we have the preliminary data for September, looks to be the same, dead flat, potentially slightly negative. And so when the final numbers do roll in at the end of November, we could very well be in a technical recession, although it would very much be a rounding error recession, not so much that growth is negative, just that we haven't seen any growth at all this year.
So, what is a technical recession? What is the definition of a technical recession versus a recession?
Well, a recession period is just two periods of negative real GDP growth, which could plausibly be the second and third quarters of this year. Now, there isn't a hard and fast definition between technical and actual, I guess, if you were to put it that way. But these two quarters look like the growth is not dramatically negative, not say -1 or -2%, but maybe minus zero point 0.1, or the second quarter this year was minus zero point 0. Technically, yes, it would be a recession, two quarters, but it wouldn't be substantial drops in real GDP. The economy is sitting and has been sitting in Canada on this knife's edge. We're not seeing growth, but we're not seeing huge declines in economic growth either. On the plus side, this really hasn't hit the labor market yet. I mean, we've seen some indications of increasing unemployment, but that's been relatively insulated, although we will get an update on that later on this week on Friday.
How does this report affect Canadian consumers?
Well, generally, Canadian consumers, in terms of the employment side, have been doing relatively well. I mean, wages are attempting to claw their way back against the inflationary period that we saw for the past 2 years, roughly. Broadly speaking, the way that interest rates are affecting the economy are in areas like the purchase of durable goods, for instance. We're seeing that on the wholesale side this time around. The impact on construction, particularly of new homes. There has actually been a slight uptick in this month's data, but long term, there's a lot less construction of new homes than there was, even during the depths of the pandemic. So at this point, from consumers' perspective, despite big increases in costs and things like rent and mortgage interest costs, they're relatively insulated. The trouble, of course, is that as we retain these much higher interest rates that are likely to continue in the fall and winter, more and more folks have to renew mortgages, more and more folks have to lock in at higher rent levels. And that constrains their ability to spend in the economy and potentially puts additional pressure, particularly in the fourth quarter.
David MacDonald. David is the senior economist at the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Thank you so much.